My name is Karlo. I have a last name, but I can't pronounce it. But if you, it might even be one of the CTF flags. I don't even know. I have a lot of letters after my last name. It impresses some people. It's a lot of letters, yeah. I think of all the alphabet soup that I have at the end of my name, the one I'm most proud is the CDRE, which is the Certified Data Recovery Expert, which I acquired attending Scott Moulton's outstanding hard drive data recovery class at myharddrivedied.com, who's also a sponsor. And I don't say that just because he's sitting in the front row, though he's a pretty awesome guy. And he is the second keynote at the con. So, and if you don't know, Scott Moulton is kind of a big deal. So, yeah. Yeah. So, what I wanted to talk to you guys about was I've been doing security for a little bit, and I have a slide here that talks about kind of my background. But before I kind of go into that a little bit, I started thinking about kind of the theme of the con, you know, Think Different, and so this is my Think Different slide. I think every member of this community is a wonderful example of what it's like to be an individual who marches to the beat of his or her own drum, which may or may not always cause you to be the life of the party, but you're certainly welcome to be the life of the party here with the rest of us. I came home one day, and this is this is an actor portrayal. This is the extent of my Photoshop abilities, where I take two pictures, rotate one, and use paint. I came home one day, and I was with a friend of mine, and I saw my welcome mat was turned 90 degrees, and part of the edge of it was flipped over onto the threshold of my door. Now, I've been informed that 99.9% of the population would see that. They would lean down, they would turn the welcome mat back the other way, they'd unlock the door, they'd go in, and they'd proceed with their boring and completely common lives. What I did is I immediately stopped. I looked at my welcome mat. I looked under the welcome mat. I, of course, then looked to see if there were any wires sticking out or any oily stains on the welcome mat that would somehow indicate that it was perhaps booby-trapped. I then proceeded to turn around and look up and down my street to see if anybody else's welcome mats had been turned 90 degrees, because already the gears in my head were turning. I asked myself, were I a nefarious individual, what would this mean to me? Well, it would mean that I went around this neighborhood at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where I figured nobody was home, and I went around knocking on doors, pretending to be some kind of door-to-door salesperson, and if nobody answered the door, I was going to rotate their doormat to then be able to come back later, maybe a few days later, and rob the place, right? And all of this transpired in my head in a matter of seconds, and my friend's literally standing there. I'm not saying anything. I'm looking at the mat. I'm looking under the mat. I'm walking to the sidewalk. I'm looking down one side of the street. I'm looking down the other side of the street. I haven't said a word. I really completely forgot my friend was there until he said, "What are you doing? It's cold. Can we go inside now?" And I was like, oh, well, yeah, sure. So then we go inside, and I explain my entire thought process, right? And then my friend looks at me, who's not in InfoSec, and says, is this how your brain works all the time? Like, is this what you are about? Like, this is you, right? And I was like, well, yeah, this is exactly how I think. Isn't this how you think? I was like, no, this isn't how I think at all. So for me, I think growing up without first being part of this community, really thinking that I was sort of an outlier in that, wonderful cloud chart that we saw in the earlier presentation, to then have found a community of like-minded individuals who also think different, I feel is extremely amazing and warm and welcoming. So I want to thank you all for being part of this community. And even though I'm a freak outside the con who thinks that a doormat means that I'm going to be robbed and or blown up, all of you probably thought something equally as ridiculous if you had seen it, right? Absolutely, right? So thank you, right, for letting me know that I'm not the only freak that feels that at any given day I might get blown up for no real apparent reason. And I had security footage, but I didn't want to do that in front of my friend because he was already looking at me weird. That is actually a real welcome mat. You can buy it on Etsy. No, it's not that's not my house. This is just an artist rendering of what my house might look like if I had a welcome mat that said tacos. Well, if you're going to throw maracas at me, I might as well own it, right? I mean, that's what you're supposed to do when confronted with a bully like Mr. Koenig. Whatever. All right, so back to the presentation. I was asked to do a presentation at a conference for automation. It's really kind of a thinly veiled vendor-sponsored conference. And they're like, Karlo, you know security. You go and talk about something. I was like, all right, well, I can talk about when you should do automation and when you shouldn't. So this talk kind of morphed from that original talk. This is one of those prerequisite slides, right? There's the title slide. There's who I am. There's the questions at the end slide. So here's me kind of in a nutshell. I have done stand-up comedy before. I've found that speaking at conferences helped me do stand-up comedy, and doing stand-up comedy has helped me speak at conferences. So I like to do what I call my patented brand of edutainment, where you will be educated and amazed and hopefully laugh along with me or at me or near me, whatever. I don't really care as long as you're laughing. So here we go. So who here knows what a SOC is, right? For those who don't know, it's a security operations center, right? When you go to, like when you see NASA, right, with the screens and the people and the desks, and it's 24/7, right? It's like that, but for security, right? You have the same thing, only it's called a NOC for a network operations center. Those folks are charged with uptime of the network. The SOC folks are charged with the security of the network. All right. So how do you start a SOC? Well, I don't know how you're supposed to start a SOC, but I can tell you how every single SOC I've ever walked into has started, right? You've got a network, you've got a network admin. The network admin gets told to buy and deploy a firewall. Firewall gets deployed, and then all of a sudden the firewall is generating alerts. But they're not uptime alerts. They're not CPU overload alerts. They're security alerts, and the network admin doesn't really know what to do with these things. So V goes to the guy who told him to buy the firewall in the first place, and he says, look, it's all fine and good. It's there. It's configured as far as I know. The light's on, right? It's a machine that goes ping. But I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with this, so maybe you want to hire some folks that do know how to do something and be the consumers of this data. Right? So typically, they will all of a sudden go out, they'll clear out one of the office supply closets, they'll put in some desks, they'll put in some monitors. If you're lucky, there's some free snacks in there. They'll fill it with contractors and say, poof, we have a SOC. It's amazing, right? Everybody in this room knows that's entirely how you don't deploy a SOC, but management is what it is, and they just figure throwing bodies worked at every other problem I tried to solve, so let's just throw bodies at this one, right? And then a body is a body is a body. So inevitably what happens is that something goes sideways. So the point of this talk is to talk about why SOCs fail. And they fail for a variety of reasons, all of which I have seen, and all of which I suspect you have seen as well. Here's where the edutainment part comes in, right? Because half of you is going to nod at half of my presentation, and the other half is going to nod at the other half. Then we're going to do a whole sing-along and a round. It's going to be awesome. Okay. It breaks out into 3 categories, of which you can read, because I hate reading slides to people. And I hate when people read slides to me. I feel fairly confident that 99% of the people in this room, with the exception of Mr. Koenig, can read. You know mine. They're fake. I bought them at a hipster store. Yeah. The guy was like, you totally will look smart wearing these. I was like, here's $20. $200. Yeah. It was the poor people hipster store. All right. So let's go down the list, right? We're gonna run through all of the bad things, then we're gonna run through all the solutions. That's kind of how this works, right? I set it up, and then I fix it, and you guys are like bewildered and amazed, right? Every SOC has folks that actually know how to do the work, right? When I first started this presentation, I called them the smart people in the SOC. I was told not to call it that because that apparently offended the stupid people in the SOC. I was told that I wasn't supposed to call them stupid people. So just pretend, right? That instead of skilled, that says smart, and so on and so forth, right? Every SOC has at least 1 or 2 individuals like this. The problem is that everybody quickly realizes that these are the go-to folks that actually do the work. And so not only are these people the folks that management leans on to get stuff done quickly, it's also the folks that the rest of the team leans on to get stuff done quickly. They're the ones that have the most institutional knowledge. They're also the ones that are going to burn out the fastest by virtue of the fact that they're being tasked all the time, right? We have promotion through attrition, right? How many times have you seen a junior analyst get promoted to a regular analyst, get promoted to a senior analyst, get promoted to an incident responder, get promoted to a hunt team member, all by virtue of the fact that he or she never left their seat in 3 years, right? Raise your hands, right? This happens all the time. Well, I'm not entirely sure why, but I do have some effective ways of dealing with this, which we will discuss later on. All of this, of course, is really driven by the fact that supply and demand in the industry is horribly skewed. We have way more job openings than we have qualified folks to fill them. So we inevitably end up filling these slots with just, what we in the contracting realm used to call butts and seats, right? I'm a contracting company. I was given a rec to fill a contract with 10 qualified folks at X number of dollars. If I don't have a person in that seat, I don't get to collect those dollars, and if I don't collect those dollars, I don't make money. So I'm going to find some folks, I'm going to put them in there, and if they eventually get canned, I'll just put other folks in there, and we'll just repeat until the contract's over. I've got my money, why should I be worried, right? All of this, of course, then drives morale down the toilet, right? And all of these things inevitably end up affecting morale. And once your SOC is affected with like low morale or no morale, it is incredibly difficult to come out of that black bottomless pit. Because at that point, everybody's just disgruntled, disenfranchised, doesn't even want to be there, doesn't want to go the extra mile, and they don't really want to work, right? That's when you see like your web proxy metrics for Netflix and YouTube and all that stuff just like skyrocket out of the SOC. Because of course, who are the folks who are allowed to visit every single website in your organization, even though the rest of the company can't? It would be the SOC, right? Why? Because for research, right? Okay, so on that note, we will generate metrics in any business organization, but we don't generate good metrics in business organizations. I come out of supporting a government agency, and I work as an SE working for the civilian federal market. So I see a lot of situations where contracts are awarded. In the contract, there's verbiage about metrics, and it states when the metrics need to be gathered, who the metrics need to be given to, and then as a result, the contract gets awarded, a PM gets assigned, someone generates metrics, they generate them when they're supposed to generate them, they print them out in a binder, and then where does that binder go? On the shelf, right? Because the metrics are worthless, right? But you're meeting your contractual requirements, and that means you get paid, and then life is good, right? This one drives me absolutely crazy, right? You're going to spend $2 million on a tool to help your SOC, right? It's not uncommon to see folks spending $2 million like on a SIM, right? ArcSight, Splunk, QRadar, Alien Vault, Graylog, whatever. You spend $2 million buying a tool, even though Graylog's free. You won't spend $2,000 to send somebody to training, right? What is $2,000 in terms of a percentage of $2 million? Anybody off the top of your head? It's 0.1, right? Unless somebody wants to check my math. So you won't even spend 1% of the money you spend on the tool to train somebody. And why? Why do they say they don't want to train somebody? Because if I train that person might leave, right? Well, I don't want to provide that person value, incentive, initiative, or any kind of mentorship, or show them that I value their ability as a skilled worker, not a smart worker. That would be insensitive and to the stupids. And so we don't do this, right? Which is terrible, because inevitably what happens to that individual? They leave anyway, right? It's the nature of operations. Folks are going to leave. Not sending them to training is not the magic answer here to keep them stuck and chained to their seats. That's just not going to happen. This one I see all the time, right? You get new buzzwords. One I'm seeing now in SOCs is automation. It used to be hunt teams, right? And the way you stand up a hunt team, by the way, is the same way you stand up a SOC. You're like, I saw this word hunt team in CIO magazine. I think we need one of those. Let's clear out the other office supply closet, put a bunch of folks in there, and we'll make them the hunt team, right? And then they still don't know what they're supposed to be doing, but that's another presentation. So automation is now the new thing. They'll come back and be like, well, we need an automation tool. Well, that's great. We should probably deploy that after we have processes written down. maybe, or any kind of consistency that we can feed the automation tool. But yeah, by all means, bring in the automation vendor. Hopefully he'll sell us a tool for $2 million. And then maybe I'll get a brown bag lunch for 4 hours that shows me how to use the tool, because of course any tool worth a mere $2 million will be easily driven to its extreme abilities with a 4-hour training session by the vendor with a sad cold sandwich and an apple and, some crappy off-brand soda. Right, that's why there's YouTube. Holy cow, my presentation's over, ladies and gentlemen. The answer to all the things is YouTube. All right. And then lastly, because as technical folks, we hate to write anything down, and then we hate to read anything that we write down, and then the person next to us hates to read anything that we write. We will attempt to write processes, but the minute one of these processes goes sideways, we will, instead of trying to say, hey, Charles, you're a human being, and as a human, I understand that you are capable of occasionally making an error despite all the training that I sent you to. Oh, wait, I didn't do that. But still, I recognize that you are a human being. No, instead of doing that and just basically being like, Charles, please don't do that again. Let's move on. No, we're going to take a 2-page process and turn it into a 10-page process so that we can remove any ability on Charles's part to possibly ever make a mistake. So instead of 10 or 20 sentences with 1 or 2 screenshots, I now have a 10-page document that's nothing but screenshots telling you where to click, where to not click, how to right-click. It's the most ridiculous exercise. And if you thought that the folks weren't going to read your 2-page document, good luck having them read your 10-page document. Yeah, I mean, you are making a pretty picture book, but they're still not going to look at it, right? So then what do we do, right? The SOC grows, maybe we're going to hire some more folks. So we bring in a new employee. Who do we assign to shadow that new employee? Do we assign the skilled worker who's already pulling his or her hair out? Or do we assign that individual the person that seems to be sitting around not doing a whole lot right about now, and certainly seems to be doing a whole lot of nothing every time you walk into the SOC, right? Oh, well, Bob's not doing anything, so let's go ahead and just assign the new hire to shadow Bob. So in your head, if you run this through several iterations where like Bob is the root of laziness, and then 3 new employees get hired and they all learn Bob's lazy methods of barely getting by, and then those 3 train another 3, right? It's a pretty easy pyramid scheme of laziness that you have now bred into your SOC, right? Way to go. So, in addition to then having the hard workers and the non-workers, should anyone ever actually do a good job? We don't do a good job as operations folks of rewarding or even recognizing that an individual has done something that's worth recognition, right? So then you end up breeding the office space mentality, right? Where you have 5 bosses. So if you screw up, you're going to get yelled at 5 times. So your only incentive is to come in and do just enough work to not get yelled at, right? It's funny until you realize that is exactly how every operations center is run. And then you realize, holy crap, we need to fix this, and we need to fix this immediately. Thank you, Adam. I'm glad you asked. I have not paid Adam. He is not a shill in the audience. So here we go. There's a gentleman who gave a presentation at ShmooCon in 2013 by the name of Carson Zimmerman. His presentation was 10 Strategies of a World-Class Cybersecurity Operations Center. He works for MITRE, which, if some of you don't know, is kind of a government-funded think tank organization. They get given money by various government agencies and told to solve problems or do research. And so Carson's research led him down this path. And as a result, he wrote a book aptly called 10 Strategies of a World-Class Cybersecurity Operations Center. I was sitting in the front row when Carson gave his talk. He gave it at ShmooCon. His talk is on YouTube. You can watch it. His book which is, if I told you was $5,000 and you had to like send a special email to MITRE and get like a signed letter from your congressman to be given a copy of this super secret book, you'd be like, holy crap, that's pretty awesome. I'm calling my congressman right now, because I know that's totally what I do. His book's actually available for free on the internet. If you Google this, the first hit will be Carson's book in PDF form. If you see him somewhere, he usually has 2 or 3 copies in his bag that he will give you. And Carson's points, of which he had 10, the 2 of which were the most important to me were these 2. Put computer network defense under one umbrella and empower your computer network defense team to do their job in a crisis. So one of the many operation centers that I worked at, I was a government contractor. The CIO of the company at one of these massive all hands stood on the stage floor and he said, look, we make a significant amount of our revenue based on our outsourced incident response and security services. So here's the thing. When one of these folks calls you for the duration of their investigation, they are your boss. And then like the room just went silent, right? Like it really had to sink in. And they're like, we don't want to ever hear anything that somebody said, you're not my boss, you're not my manager, I can't help you, you need to send an email, you need to go through the chain of command. These individuals are, crisis response type of individuals, and they provide a very valuable service to our customers, which happens to be the United States government. So, unless you hate America, you'll take their call and you'll do what they say. Which would then lead one to believe that I basically just got handed the keys to the kingdom for the ultimate social engineering exercise. Like, oh my God, the building's on fire. You have to deliver pizza here right now, right? But it was really impressive that the CIO had that kind of forward-thinking vision, to use a lot of buzzwords, to actually go out and say to his entire staff that this is how we were going to run things. And I've never worked at an ops center that had the fastest response time to closure of an incident than that one company. And I firmly believe it's because the head of the company basically said, this is how we're going to do it. And if I hear about anybody saying no, you're going to have a meeting with me face to face. And that basically means come to the meeting with a box with all your crap in it, right? So if you're curious what Carson's points were other than the first 2, this is what they are. I will pause now for people to take pictures. Thank you, Adam. So in addition to Carson's 10 points, which are amazingly fine points and I think everybody should do, my points are additional points, which is why I listed all the issues. So let's talk about the solutions, right? What do we do when our skilled folks are overutilized and the rest are underutilized? So in operations, there's this mentality that if you know how to do something, that's job security, and you don't want to share your skills with others because that means others might be able to do your job, and that somehow devalues your contribution to the SOC. I think this is kind of narrow-minded thinking. I totally get it, though, because I used to be one of those people. But then I had a manager who actually pulled me aside and said, look, if you take a couple of the folks on the floor that you think are at least marginally skilled, and teach them to do some of the things that you are doing on a daily basis, you are then free to pursue those longer-term projects that you've been wanting to do but didn't have the time to do. And the key here is that they are projects those individuals want to do. No one is going to want to have their cycles freed up to go do a bunch of stuff they wouldn't have done in the first place. Then they're just going to want to give themselves even more busy work to be like, oh man, I'd totally love to work on your senseless metrics project, but I'm working on this other thing over here, right? So you have to ask those folks to at least take some time, even if it's some of the low-hanging tasks that they know how to do, and teach other folks how to do those things just so that they're freed of those things. And maybe eventually they'd actually be able to take a vacation. Which I know I didn't do. I just considered all my vacation hours as extra bonus money when the contract ended, and I ended up switching companies, and then I got a nice payout, and of course I couldn't take a vacation, so it just kind of sat in the bank. But it was still, hey, free money, right? Promotion through attrition. Instead of promoting the folks that are left, I think it would really be a much better idea to bring in some new blood. Partially because now you're sending a message to the organization that says that just by the virtue of showing up doesn't mean you get promoted, right? There's no participation trophy here, much less, promotion participation trophy. Bringing in somebody new also gives those folks an opportunity to hear how they're doing their job from somebody else's perspective that's coming in and maybe hasn't been completely demoralized yet, right? That's also the only way you're going to raise morale, is by trying to bring in some new folks that actually want to do the job they're being hired to do. Which then leads to the whole supply and demand problem. So how do we fix bullets 2 and 3, right? You're going to have to can somebody. I used to have this idea. I was going to start a company called hiretofire.com. Patent pending, patent pending, patent pending. Basically, we're just going to hire temporary folks to come in and be crappy employees. And then those employees were going to get fired, hopefully in like the most theatrically awesome, like open spectacle way possible, in front of like the SOC floor, right? Be like, get the hell out of here. You're not my boss, And then like security would come like escort them kicking and screaming out of the SOC, right? And I had this like weird idea that somehow was going to make morale better, right? So I think I had the right intention with that idea, but I think in business, like in practice, it probably wouldn't have worked. But I think there's probably a lot more value if you actually found the individual who wasn't doing the work and was the source of the low morale, the person who was really just driving the fact that they were the living, shining example that management could not care less whether or not you did a good job or not. And that's the person that you just let go, which will achieve 2 things. One, it will hopefully send a message to the folks that are kind of on the fence as to whether they want to stop giving a crap or not, that you actually do care, so maybe they should too. And 2, well, now you've got an open rec. Hopefully you can hire somebody that's a little more qualified, right? So, metrics, and this was kind of easy. You need to bring in those same skilled, smart individuals and actually have a sit-down meeting and say, hey, if you were to generate some metrics, or maybe, hey, I heard you actually go and run some metrics kind of on the side that help you prioritize your investigations. Let's talk about those metrics that would actually mean something to you and to the organization and to the rest of the team, and generate those metrics. Now, you may need to generate those metrics as well as the completely useless metrics that get printed and 3-hole punched and put in a binder and put on the shelf. But that's okay. That's somebody else's job, right? But yeah, absolutely. Have a conversation. As technology people, we're not very good at communicating with each other, even though most of us are relatively passionate about the things that we do. When it comes to actually sitting down with management, somehow like, we speak Klingon, they speak Vulcan, and like things just stop communication. So we need to do a better job in both directions about trying to talk to management and trying to get management to listen to what we have to say. All right. Again, you spent $2 million on a tool and you don't want to send somebody to training. You just have to send somebody to training. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just how it goes, right? You want to get your $2 million worth out of this tool. Don't send one person, send 2 people. One of them might leave. The other person might eventually leave. You should have 2 people trained at any massively expensive tool in your organization at any one time, especially because at some point, maybe one of them is going to want to go take a vacation. Maybe they'll get hit by a bus, whatever. You don't want to have a single point of failure and have spent $4,000 when you spent $2 million. You might as well spend 8, right? It's training. And if you're really that paranoid, make them sign one of those things that says they're not going to leave for X number of days, months, weeks, or years. I find the magic number is 6 to 9 months. It's just long enough for them to want to take the training, not so long that they're going to feel shackled and not be able to leave, right? And you can either make it a flat fee where they have to pay the whole thing back, or like every month that goes by, it's a percentage less, blah, blah, blah. Jumping into the latest buzzword du jour, rather than trying to fix all the stuff that's broken in your organization, the automation versus integration one gets me all the time, because management has this idea that if you deploy automation, it's going to make things like a one-button type of incident response tool with like lasers and like space people and like anti-gravity suits and all kinds of happy stuff. But the reality is that an automation tool takes just as much care and feeding to stand up as your largest, most expensive tool like your SIM, if not possibly more time. So what they don't see is that they're going to have to pay the $2 million for the tool and 6 months of an FTE professional services guy or gal from that company to come in at some like ridiculously exorbitant like $600 an hour rate. So there's no free automation, You'd be better off sitting down with the engineering teams that are responsible for your various security tools that you already own and saying, hey, you're responsible for antivirus, you're responsible for the firewall, you're responsible for the IDS, and you're responsible for, you're from the NOC. I want you to take a piece of paper and take 15 minutes to Google if you don't know the answer, but at the end of 15 minutes, you're going to tell me all the different other vendors that your tool will interface and either feed or receive a feed from, right? Then we're all going to stand up here and we're going to write them on the whiteboard, and then we're going to draw lines to all the vendors where all our products intersect, and then we're going to go work on that because that's integrating the tools we've already paid for. And that's a much better return on investment than trying to figure out how to automate all the things. I had a situation where, for some reason, this massive nationwide deployment of customers had DHCP for their workstations. So at any given day, we had no idea who was logged into a workstation when we received an alert, right? So we knew the name of the workstation, we knew the IP address of the workstation, but we didn't know who was logged into it. So then I realized that they'd set their antivirus client to do a scan every single day of their workstation. And it turned out that their AV product was extremely chatty in their logs, but the logs lived locally on each and every workstation. So you could actually RDP into the workstation, go into the logs, and the logs would tell you the name of the account that was logged into every single time the scan ran. And we were able to then use that as kind of a poor man's Active Directory lookup tool to be able to actually reach out to the end user and be like, hey, you're going to be incredibly inconvenienced for the next 48 hours because we're going to send a technician to you to take your machine from you and then re-image it, because that was the way that we dealt with issues back in the 90s. Either way, you at least got one step closer, right? So then we figured out we could just write a script and at midnight go around and scrape that log file for that one line for every single day, and now we had a repository of information, right? I kind of discovered that on accident, but if I'd been sitting with the AV engineer at the time, they'd be like, oh yeah, here's what the logs look like, and we could totally pull all the stuff in there now, and of course now you can probably do it all in Splunk, but still and yet, the fact remains, you need to have those conversations because you'd be amazed what you might find out based on the folks that manage the tools. They know their tool. They may not necessarily even know that these other tools exist. All right. Instead of chastising poor Charles here for being a human being, we just need to take a moment and take a step back and accept the fact that by virtue of the fact that we're all human beings, we all make mistakes. Like not being able to pronounce, Curtis Koenig's name over here. When we bring in our new employees, let's say you have 2 or 3 really skilled workers in your environment. Rather than assigning your new hire, Bob, the lazy employee who really just wants to sit and collect his check and go home, time slice your new hire across 2 or 3 of those smart and skilled individuals, right? Each one of those will probably not have time to be the mentor 24 hours a day for that one individual, but they'll certainly have enough time to spend at least a couple of hours with your new hire. And the beauty about doing this is twofold. You kind of force the skilled folks to test the waters at being a mentor, but also every new hire now learns all of the tips and tricks from your 3 smartest folks, right? So now you're actually in that same pyramid, right? Instead of making the pyramid of lazy, you're actually making this pyramid of efficiency, where each new hire will hopefully be a little bit more efficient than the last one, by virtue of the fact that they're going to find new shortcuts, and then those will then get bubbled up through the ranks as your new employees come on board. This one's ridiculously easy. If you have an employee who does a good job, for God's sakes, do something about it, right? What does it cost you to go to Office Max and buy the box of certificates of achievement and put their name on it? I know it sounds ridiculous. As grown-ups, we're sitting here and having this conversation where I'm like, hey, if you were to print this out and put somebody's name on it and put it in a nice $1 IKEA frame and give it to them, they would be extremely pleased, right? It doesn't always have to be money. Recognition can go a long way. Especially if that's something that other employees can then see and be like, well, man, I want the Montgomery Burns First Annual Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Field of Excellence. That's awesome. Yeah, challenge coins, and pizza parties, which again sounds like we're like 14 years old and having a sleepover with our buds, right? I'm 42 and I love pizza, right? And if it's free pizza, it's the best pizza, right? Yeah, and now we can have beer, right? In moderate amounts with HR representatives supervising. But the thing is, if you run a 24/7 ops center, don't make this mistake, which is where you bring in the pizza for the first shift, you order enough pizza that second shift gets mostly their fair share of pizza, and then the third shift comes in and there's like one piece of pizza. It's been sitting there for 10 hours. It's now doing the elf shoe thing where like the tip, like because of the, it's pointing up to Jesus. And like now you're just like, oh my God, I'm starving. It's 2 a.m. I'm totally going to eat this elf shoe pizza. Right? And like for some reason, the third shift person's extremely grateful that they managed to win like the rock, paper, scissors for this last piece of gnarly pizza. If you were to show up with actual warm food to the third shift folks that I promise you have gone neglected the entire time that operation center has been in existence, these people will jump in front of a car for you. Like they will literally be like, oh no. Eric came one time and he brought pizza and it was hot and it was delicious. No, don't say things about, no, don't badmouth Eric. Eric's awesome. I got pizza, right? And they'll literally, like, that's their frame of reference. You're awesome because you brought pizza, like, that one day, that one time. You don't have to do it all the time, but every now and then, surprise pizza is an amazing gift. And you're out, what, $30? I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. And again, beer. All right. Some other foundational things. Yes, 10 minutes. So this is, Karlo's presentation of 9 things plus some that he thought of later. And just some things that I've seen be very successful. I saw an ops center where they had a dedicated new hire trainer. And this was basically an individual who was skilled in both being a trainer in terms of having the background in education and knowing how to teach a person things, but also had the requisite technical background to understand the job. It wasn't just somebody that ran you through all the processes and procedures. This was the person that you went to when you weren't working with the 2 or 3 skilled individuals to kind of do the rest of the remedial training stuff. Right, so there was like the hands-on training, and then there's the classroom part. Right, it's just like when you learn to drive, you got to take the classroom, and then you go get on the road. Right. So the one thing that I would say against automation is this one: that we have the ability to make folks feel like they're a contributing member of a team, and everybody wants to feel like they're a valuable member of a team. So I'm going to give you 2 scenarios. Right. That may or may not have happened in real life. You're a new employee. You come into the organization, right? And they're like, "Hey, new employee, welcome aboard." Giant morale-crushing corporation, and we're glad you're here. You're going to have a new hire period of like 2 weeks, and your training starts today. Have a seat here at this table. Here's a 3-ring binder that's about that thick. Here are all our processes and procedures. We'd like you to spend the next 2 weeks reviewing our processes and procedures before you hit the ground running in our operations floor. Right? Wow. Talk about taking somebody who's completely passionate about their job and just like completely ruining that. So here's scenario 2, right? Welcome, new employee, morale crushing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to teach you what is probably the easiest incident to run in our operations center, and that's lost and stolen laptops. All right? It's really just a paperwork shuffle. Once the laptop's gone, it's gone. But, you need to call the end user. You need to ask them if they got a police report. If they did, they need to email it to you. You need to create a ticket. You need to attach it to the ticket. You need to log all these things. Then when it's all said and done, you close the ticket and you're done. Right? It seems ridiculously easy. Well, it is ridiculously easy. Well, that's great, because that's going to be your job for the next 2 weeks. You're the lost and stolen person. Any lost and stolen cases that come in, you're the individual who's going to handle them. All right? So by virtue of doing that, I have now taken an employee on their first day. It maybe took me half a day to show them how to just run through all the things, give them the 1 or 2 printouts with the limited screenshots that show them how to do these things. And they have now, by the end of the day, become a contributing member of the team that they're supporting. They now have the ability to ask questions of other team members in the floor that they're going to be working with for the rest of the time that they're there. And they feel valuable at the end of the first day. Yes, there are processes they need to learn, but they can learn them as they go. You don't need to completely crush their spirit with the giant binder of doom, right? And this individual now goes home and literally feels like, man, this is a cool job. Like, I was totally running incidents on the first day. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's just a paperwork shuffle, right? But that doesn't matter. Again, it goes towards morale. They feel valuable. And at the end of the 2 weeks, guess what they've learned? They've learned how to run the ticketing system. They've learned how to use your email templates. They've learned how to reach out to the end users. They've learned how to, in some instances, walk somebody through filling out a police report, right? They've learned all of the tools they will more than likely need to use on the daily course of their job. But instead of making it a soul-crushing exercise, you actually ended up kind of gamifying it and making it fun for that individual, or, as fun as it can be. And then at that point, based on that foundational knowledge, they can expand into some of the other incidents that maybe just bring in a separate tool or one or two other systems they hadn't interfaced before, right? But that's how you do it, right? So which job would you rather have, right? Soul-crushing option 1 or valuable member of the team 2, right? If you say 1, well, you're just being a jerk. Right, yeah, or a sadist, whatever. So that's my advice in terms of automation, right? Don't automate your low-hanging fruit out of your system, or if you do have automation in place, still use those as a way to train individuals on how to do your job, because then at the end you can be like, oh, by the way, you can just push these 3 buttons and it'll totally do those things that I taught you how to do, like by hand. But if that goes down, you can still do your job. Like, you're not just monkey pushes the button, right, on the pen test team. No, not pen test, I'm kidding. That's the vulnerability scanning team that does that. So the last thing I will say, and this is probably the hardest question I've seen in terms of trying to answer, is, as a person who manages people in a SOC, how do I know what my employees don't know? How do I know where my team has a strong skill set in terms of security detection and where they are extremely weak? How do I know who's flagging things as a false positive in the middle of the night because they're trying to catch up on Game of Thrones? And that individual is the individual that is going to end up having you in your company end up on the front page of, the Washington Post or, whatever, the LA Times, or because, some newspaper of the local regional area, right? Because they weren't doing their job, right? And it was that very one easy thing that they could have done, but you didn't know they didn't know it, right? So there are companies out there that make tools that do audits. I know of one. This is not an endorsement. This is just the one that I know. The company's named Veridin, and I will have it in the next slide. It allows you to set up 2 nodes on either side of, say, your perimeter security boundary, and you can run attacks to and from each other. So that allows you to say, is my firewall working? Is my IDS working? Is my malware sandbox appliance working? And are my analysts catching it? Are they flagging it a false positive? Are they actually running the right things? And it will tell you what types of incidents they're good at catching and which ones they're not good at catching. And if you have training money, guess where you now know where to spend your money. Bring somebody in that's going to teach them about web app hacking and pen testing and how those attacks look like on the network, because you realize they're really weak on those types of things, but they're really good at catching like remote shells and other types of exploits, right? So you now have a much better understanding of your team, where they're good, where they're not good, and where you can focus your training money, because that's how you can justify bringing in training to begin with. Because everybody's like, I want a return on investment. How do you prove that the money you're spending is worthwhile? Blah, management. This is how, right? And with that, I am done. Does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any questions that aren't answered by this? Do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to click make noise.
Jesus with the maracas.
Reba!
All right. Nicely done.
Oh,
yes,
question.
sir. So like, let's say, what is an example of useful metrics? So let's start with non-useful metrics, right? I want a report that breaks out the top 10 sources and destinations from my firewall on a quarterly basis. Blah, that's totally worthless, right? But as an incident responder, I would want a report, say, from the web proxy for 7, 14, and 30 day, and then if I could, longer, that did things like show me IPs that accessed a website less than 10 times in a 60-day period, right? I'm looking for those extremely, outlying, low and slow one-offs. Because if you think about a business and employees, there's going to be a huge chunk of websites that you can eliminate in terms of what you think your employees are browsing to, and then there's going to be some where you're like, this is really strange. Why would somebody go to this website at 3 in the morning, right? And it's like from a workstation that's hardly ever used. So you can start to actually build reports for things that, because I always like to go for the low hanging fruit, but also the low and slow type of attacks, right? So I do like the highs and the lows. I'd eliminate the highs right off the bat, and then I'd start at the lows and work my way up to figure out what that weird threshold would be. So if I have workstations that do like one website every 60 days, or 1, 10, 20, 30, 40, and then from 40 it goes to 10,000, right? So I know that from 40 and below is kind of what I'm looking for, and that's the type of report that I want run. So that's the kind of stuff, and that's only something that would be run if you were an incident responder and asked them, what do you want to see? Yes, sir. The question is, I want to report that tracks the metric of X, and the answer they get back is, you can't measure that. It depends on the environment. I think you might be running into an issue where they think that if they just say no to you first, as the first answer, the reflex reaction, that you'll go away. I would say I would keep insisting, and if necessary, I would reach out to my community and say, has anybody else tried to get this type of metric from their organization, and have you had any pushback, and if so, how did you solve it? Or do you have an example that I can take to them and say, no, in actuality, you totally can, and here's how other people have done it. Sometimes you have to approach them with the question and the answer as the answer. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. Again, my name is Karlo. I'll be here all week. Don't forget to tip your waitress. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much.